Hello and welcome to Fade to PB8. In this episode, we'll be coloring in this image of a wooden ship in stormy weather. So I'll go ahead and start from the beginning and voice it over. I'll speed it up so it's not a 2-hour video, and I hope you enjoy. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I hope you learned something. Thank you. So in most of my drawings, I start with the background, and it's usually the sky that I begin with. This drawing is no exception. And for this image, I want it to be stormy. I want it to be dark sky, kind of dark water, and the ship will be dark too. I gotta kind of match the ship to the background and the water as well. So what I'm doing with these clouds here is I am first creating a gradient. It's gonna go light to dark from top to bottom, and I want the bottom of the sky or the horizon to be really dark. I want it to look like in the distance it's getting darker, and so that kind of creates a light source that's behind us, and that will help the ship look a little bit better. If I had done it the other way, where it was dark at the top and light in the horizon, that means your light source is behind the ship, and then it just wouldn't look great if you try to shade it. You would end up having to make it look realistic. The whole side of the ship that's facing us would end up being pretty shadowy. So you want to try to create your light source so it kind of looks like it's over your shoulder. I'm right-handed, so I usually put the light source over my right shoulder. If you're left-handed, it's probably easier to do it over your left hand or your left shoulder. I'm not entirely certain why that is, but it just is. It's much easier to have light source on your dominant side. So here I am. I'm still just creating that gradient, getting a little bit darker and darker. Each marker gets a little bit thinner and thinner as I go. And I always like to kind of go light to dark. I start with the lightest colors and I go darker. Now some people will go dark to light, but I find that going light to dark it's just much more forgiving. Because basically what happens is every single time you put down a new layer, the paper gets more damp. It gets a little bit more wet. And we like wet paper. Wet paper makes it easier to blend. It makes it easier to correct mistakes. It makes it easier to go lighter. So if you start with that dark marker, you're putting it down on dry paper, and it's going to dry up pretty quickly. So you have to be very sure that that color that you chose is the color that you want. But if you start light to dark and you get wet paper to work with, you can really blend those darker colors, make them lighter, change the colors. And I think you'll just be more happy, more pleased with the results. It might take a little bit more time to go light to dark. It might also require a little bit more ink. But, these drawings can take hours and hours. And, one mistake can ruin an entire drawing. So when you go light to dark and you're able to correct those mistakes, it's less risky. It's much easier to correct those mistakes. And that way you're less likely to kind of ruin your image, your drawing, especially after hours of work. So for each cloud here, I'm kind of creating a small gradient for each cloud. So each cloud will be light at the top and kind of darker towards the bottom until you reach the next cloud, in which it gets light again. But I'm also going that gradient that I started initially, so the clouds at the top are going to be lighter than the clouds at the bottom. So that was a little bit of a challenge, but it was a fun challenge, and I think the result turned out pretty nicely for the clouds. Now you want to be careful not to oversaturate the paper. Now I'm working on a large surface area here, so I'm not too worried about the paper getting too wet on me. If you're working on something small, kind of maybe like a face or like a flower, like a small flower, and you're just keep going over with different markers, and you end up putting the ink down way faster than it can dry. You can oversaturate the paper, and you just want to be careful not to do that, because then the ink starts to bleed, things become monotone. So if you find that the paper gets a little too wet on you, just step aside and let it dry for a little bit. Maybe work on a different area. I also use a hairdryer sometimes. If you do use a hairdryer, a couple of key things to note is that you don't want to dry the paper 100%. Dry it 90% and let the rest air dry. Also with the hairdryer, put it on the lowest setting, and you also want to dry the back side of the paper. So kind of flip it back and forth with the hairdryer applied. Now I always pick my palette ahead of time. And the reason why I do that is because it takes time. I mean, there's a couple of reasons, but it takes time to find the right marker sometimes. And during that time, if you're in the middle of a section, the ink is drying on you. So once you start a section, you want to just keep going and going and going with as few interruptions as possible. So what I'm doing here is I'm highlighting the top of the clouds with like a yellowish, warmish gray. And that's because I want to use warm grays for the ship. And so by adding those warm grays to the clouds, it kind of helps make the ship look like it belongs in its background. If I had gone with warm grays on the ship but no warm grays in the clouds, it just doesn't go together as well. So the water was a challenge. Again, starting light to dark. Now if you look at my palette, I've kind of got different couple different groupings of markers, and I'm starting with the lightest ones. I'm starting with the natural blues. And I want my light source to be kind of on my right. So if a wave, on a wave, on the left side of the wave, it will be darker than the right side of the wave. So I'm hitting with the natural blues first, but I'm going to come in later with the blue grays to make it a lot darker. But I'd like to establish kind of where my shadows are and my tones and things like that with the lighter colors, because it just helps the image pop and it makes it look more realistic. And so I actually kind of use that as a tool to help me with further shading as I go along. Again, if I had started with the dark markers, it would just be very, very difficult. So I start with the lighter markers towards the top of the waves, and then I come in with the darker markers and just kind of hit the bottom of the waves. You'll notice that the colors are all a little jostled and they don't entirely go together. But then what I do is I bring it all together with one marker. So with the lighter markers, at first you apply the ink, but you can also use it as a blender, sort of. So I can use that light blue to blend together much darker blues. And it really won't change the color, but it will still create a nice blend for you. So here I am coming in with the grays now. This is blue gray 5, I believe, on the Ohuhu scale. And again, just kind of hitting those shadows that I already established before and just making it darker. I wanted to kind of match the sky. And when I had it before with just the natural blues, it just looked, it didn't look like it belonged with the sky in the stormy weather. So I just kind of keep going over and over and over until I'm satisfied. Hitting with the darker grays. Really, just when you do your darkest color, you generally want a pretty thin line. Even just a very thin amount of that darkest marker is going to make everything pop a lot. So you end up using a lot more of the lighter colors than you do the darker colors. I've replaced my marker sets a few times, and really what I'm doing is I'm replacing the light colors. And sometimes I'll just buy the pastel set, but it kind of depends. But I don't think I've ever run out of a really dark marker, because you just don't use them that much. And then when you do use them, they dominate a lot, so you don't need a lot of ink with the dark markers. But the light markers, you need to use them quite a bit more. So again, just going back over, and I'm trying to match the horizon of the sky. So you'll see that the horizon for the water, it gets much darker than it is in the front. Now when I do the ship here, I've got kind of 2 different palettes of browns, and I'm kind of mixing them back and forth. I'm going from palette 1 to palette 2 to palette 1 to palette 2, going lightest marker, second lightest, and so on. And by doing that, it prevents the image from being monotone. And we want it to look, we really want to avoid things being monotone, because then they look flat, they don't look real. And by kind of mixing these different colors together, it just creates a more natural wooden look to it. And then what I'll do is I'll come in with those lighter markers, and I'll kind of blend it all together. You can see here I pulled out my swatch, and I'm adding a little bit of an orangish, yellowish color. And I think that just gives it a more natural look. So yes, I pulled out my palette ahead of time. I've got my markers out. But you know what? I decided to make a change. I've got my markers just off screen. So, finding one or two extra markers isn't a big deal. But yeah, you definitely want to pick out your markers ahead of time if you can. And that also helps you if you create your entire palette before you even start drawing like the very first cloud. You can kind of compare the colors together. Just make sure, you're making sure that how dark the sky gets isn't any darker than the blue gets or any darker than the ship gets. You kind of want the darkest point of each section to be on a similar darkness scale, for lack of a better term. So for the sails, I'm doing something similar. I've got two palettes, and I'm kind of just scattering the lightest colors, and then I go slightly darker, and I'm kind of scattering it, going slightly darker, scattering it. And my intent is to color everything in, shade it, and then I want to hit it with the warm grays, because right now, if you look at the ship, it just doesn't really match its surroundings because the sky is gray, the water has a lot of gray in it, but currently the ship doesn't have any gray, and neither do the sails. So what I'm doing right now is just creating my color gradients, making sure it's not monotone. I'm doing some basic shading, going light to dark per usual, kind of scattering around those colors so we avoid being monotone. And then eventually I'll hit it with the warm grays. So again, my light source is kind of up to my right, and just casting the shadow from one sail to the next. Now this is a AI generated image. It's fun. AI generated images are a lot of fun to work with, because I basically just typed into the prompt an old wooden ship on a stormy sea, and it came up with this after a few tries. And it's a lot of fun to work with. So if you're tired of coloring books or tired of searching for like the right marker, why don't you give AI a try? It's actually a lot of fun. Just be careful. Just know that the AI is not perfect, and probably only about 1 in 10 sheets that you generate you would be worth coloring in. So now I'm hitting it with the warm grays and getting a little bit darker and darker. To be honest with you, I think I end up going a little bit too dark on some of these, and it's okay. It still looks good. I think it would have been good if I kind of left it the way it is right now, but I ended up going over with the warm grays because I was concerned about it not matching the surroundings. But I think I went one warm gray marker a little too dark, especially in the highlight areas of the sails. But overall, it's still shaded. It still looks pretty good. So overall, I give myself a B or a B plus on this one. But it was good practice with the water, and the clouds turned out really, really well. So overall, pretty happy. And that just about wraps it up. So let me know what you think in the comments section if you made it this far. If you learned anything, if you have any questions, even if you want to come up with an idea for an image, I'll throw it into the AI generator and see what it comes up with. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you.